Determine the left-sided limit and the right-sided limit and the two-sided limit as x approaches 3 pi over 2 of 2 tangent of x. Each of these involves the limit as x approaches 3 pi over 2 of 2 tangent x. The first thing to do is try plugging a 3 pi over 2 in for each of the x's. That will give 2 tangent of 3 pi over 2, which is equal to 2 times the tangent of 3 pi over 2 is the sine of 3 pi over 2, which is a negative 1, divided by the cosine of 3 pi over 2, which is a 0. We can multiply the numerators. 2 times negative 1 is a negative 2, divided by that 0. The 0 in the denominator is not actually a 0, since x is only approaching 3 pi over 2 here. It's not reaching 3 pi over 2. But a limit result of a non-zero number divided by 0 is equal to positive infinity or negative infinity, where the sign of the infinity often depends on the side the limit approaches from. We therefore have to work out each of the one-sided limits separately. We have the left-sided limit indicated by the negative superscript on the 3 pi over 2. And the right-sided limit indicated by the positive superscript on the 3 pi over 2. Let's start with the left-sided limit. The first thing to do is rewrite the trig function so that we can see where the 0 in the denominator is coming from. Tangent of x is equal to the sine of x over the cosine of x. We can now multiply the numerators together. 2 times sine of x is 2 sine x over cosine x. Cosine of 3 pi over 2 is 0. There's where the 0 is coming from. We're on the left side of 3 pi over 2 here, so we're going to think of what happens with cosine on the left side of 3 pi over 2. Left side of 3 pi over 2 is less than 3 pi over 2. On the unit circle, less than 3 pi over 2 is in the third quadrant. In the third quadrant, cosine is a negative number. But it's approaching to 3 pi over 2, therefore cosine is approaching to 0, and we replace cosine of x with a negative 0. So this will come out to 2 sine of 3 pi over 2. We can place a 3 pi over 2 in for all other x's, and the cosine is replaced with a negative 0, which gives 2 times the sine of 3 pi over 2 is a negative 1 over a negative 0, and this is equal to 2 times negative 1, which is negative 2 over a negative 0. Negative over negative is a positive, non-zero over 0 is an infinity, and there's the result of the left-sided limit. The right-sided limit will work out in a similar fashion. We can rewrite tangent as sine over cosine, so we can see where the 0 in the denominator is coming from. Multiply the numerators to give 2 sine of x over the cosine of x. This time it's approaching 3 pi over 2 from the right side. The right side of 3 pi over 2 is larger than 3 pi over 2. That would put it in the fourth quadrant in the unit circle. The cosine in the fourth quadrant is a positive number. As it approaches to 3 pi over 2, it approaches to 0, but it can be replaced with a positive 0. The 3 pi over 2 can be placed in for all other x's, with the cosine of x being replaced with a positive 0. This equals to 2. The sine of 3 pi over 2 is a negative 1 divided by positive 0. 2 times negative 1 is negative 2 over positive 0. A negative divided by a positive is a negative. A non-zero over 0 is an infinity. And there's the result of the right-sided limit. The two-sided limit depends on the results of the two one-sided limits. They do not match The two-side limit up here then will be, does not exist. And there's the results of the three different limits.